Role of pulse pressure in TSI-Stroke risk model, an 8-year longitudinal analysis Part 1, number 1718, July 17, 2026. Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation. Category, Stroke risk. Preface for readers: eat more protein and fresh vegetables. Eat less red meat and processed food. Reduce food portions if overweight. Eating a little less will not hurt you. Overeating for years will. Exercise every day. Walk at least 7,000 to 8,000 steps daily. Drink 85 to 100 ounces to 0.5 to 3.0 liters of water each day. Sleep 6 to 7 hours every night. Manage stress. Avoid emotionally draining people and unnecessary conflicts. Put your health first. Wealth, fame, and power mean little without health and life. Abstract. This study investigates the engineering role of pulse pressure PP within a 3-input stroke triggering sensitivity index TSI-Stroke model developed for long-term stroke risk monitoring. The original TSI-3B model incorporates estimated average glucose E, systolic blood pressure SBP, and pulse pressure PP. To better understand the functional contribution of PP, I developed another simplified 2-input model, TSI-3C labeled analytic. By removing PP while leaving all other computational components unchanged, the comparison was performed using more than 8 years of continuous Libra CG and glucose at June 1, 2018, July 16, 2026, together with longitudinal blood pressure measurements. It should be noted that, prior to my hemorrhagic stroke on June 21, 2025, the SBP dataset consisted of a single measurement taken each morning. Following the stroke, the measurement frequency increased substantially to approximately 202 SBP readings throughout each day, providing much higher temporal resolution during the post-stroke period, although the average numerical values of the TW models differed by only approximately 4 to 5 TSI units between 95 and 100. Their longitudinal behaviors differed substantially. The 3-input model TSI-3B preserved a more coherent temporal trajectory and produced a clearer representation of the pathophysiological transition surrounding my hemorrhagic stroke on June 21, 2025. In contrast, the 2-input model TSI-3C maintained similar long-term averages but exhibited altered temporal behavior, while the 90-day moving average analysis provided the most stable and reliable representation of the overall longitudinal stroke risk pattern. An additional and unexpected finding emerged from the monthly and quarterly analysis charts. The apparent large dip in the TSI-3C curve around Q to Q3 of 2025 was ultimately traced to incomplete data call action during the several quarters preceding my hemorrhagic stroke near the end of Q2 of 2025, rather than to the mathematical formulation itself. This finding underscores the critical importance of dataset completeness and continuity in longitudinal biomedical engineering studies. Overall, this investigation suggests that pulse pressure contributes relatively little to the average numerical magnitude of the TSI, scored only about 4 to 5 points out of an average score of 95 to 100, yet contributes substantially to the structural behavior and longitudinal interpretability of the TSI model. In addition, the study demonstrates that incomplete datasets can produce an apparent large dip in the simplified TSI-3C model, underscoring the critical importance of dataset completeness in longitudinal biomedical engineering studies. Section 1 Introduction. Engineering models are often evaluated by how accurately they predict numerical outcome. Equally important, however, is whether they preserve the dynamic behavior of the system being modeled. During the development of my TSI-Stroke risk proxy, I observed that pulse pressure PP appeared to contribute much less to the numerical value of the index than either glucose EEG or systolic blood pressure SBP. This naturally raised an engineering question. Does pulse pressure merely adjust the numerical value of the model, or does it contribute something more fundamental to the overall system behavior? To answer this question, I intentionally removed pulse pressure from the original 3-input model TSI-3B and compared the resulting 2-input model TSI-3C with the original over the same 8-year longitudinal dataset from the 1st of June 2018 through July 16, 2026. The purpose of this study is therefore not to determine which model produces larger numerical values, but rather to investigate how pulse pressure influences the longitudinal characteristics of this same stroke risk warning system. By the way, to maintain dataset homogeneity and prevent sensor bias, the continuous real-time blood pressure data collected by the watch type for acute spike monitoring were excluded from the longitudinal database. Only validated upper arm and wrist oscillometric measurements were manually entered and used for the long-term TSI calculations. Section 2 Study Design. The original TSI-3B model consists of 3 normalized variables: estimated average glucose E, normalized by 120 mg, DL systolic blood pressure SBP, normalized by 120 pulse pressure PP, normalized by 45 mmHg. The simplified model, designated TSI-3C, removes pulse pressure PP while preserving all remaining computational procedures. Mathematically, TSI-3B equals TSI-3C asterisk PP 45. This relationship immediately suggests that if PP remains relatively stable, both models should produce similar average numerical values. Because the 3-input model TSI-3B normalizes PP by dividing by 45, the mathematical formulation inherently buffers the final index score when PP is completely stripped away in model TSI-3B. The index relies entirely on SBP and glucose in the 2-input model TSI-3C. This stroke risk analysis used approximately 8 years of continuous Libra CG and glucose measurements. This period was intentionally selected because continuous glucose monitoring provides a consistent and homogeneous dataset throughout the study. Blood pressure measurements were collected over the same period, although prior to my stroke on June 21, 2025, they were generally obtained once daily, resulting in lower temporal resolution than the glucose measurements. 3 different longitudinal representations were evaluated: 90-day moving averages, monthly averages, quarterly averages. These complementary views allow both continuous and calendar-based evaluations of long-term behavior. Section 3 Results. As expected, the average numerical values of THETWO models were remarkably similar. Throughout the 8-year observation period, pulse pressure remained relatively stable. During the early years, PP averaged approximately 44 to 45 mmHg, gradually increasing to approximately 48 to 49 mmHg in recent years. Because these values remain close to the normalization reference value of 45 mmHg, the PP multiplier remains close to 1. Consequently, the long-term averages of the 2 TSI-Stroke models differed by only approximately to 5 TSI units, consistent with a small variation of pulse pressure PP. However, although the average values remain close, the longitudinal trajectories were noticeably different. The 90-day moving average comparison demonstrated only moderate agreement between the 2 models. Correlation coefficient equals 58%, indicating that removal of PP altered the temporal behavior despite producing similar average TSI scores, differing by only approximately 5 units. More importantly, the original 3-input TSI-3B model produced a clearer representation of the physiological transition surrounding my hemorrhagic stroke on June 21, 2025. Although the simplified 2-input TSI-3C model continued to follow the overall long-term trend, it produced a less distinct stroke-related signature and exhibited an apparent sharp dip in the TSI curve around Q to Q3 of 2025. Subsequent analyses demonstrated that this apparent dip resulted primarily from incomplete data collection rather than from the mathematical formulation itself. This observation suggests that pulse pressure contributes information beyond simply changing the numerical magnitude of the TSI score. Instead, PP helps preserve the structural behavior of the model to a much greater extent than its modest numerical contribution would suggest. This role is analogous to that of a mechanical damper. From an engineering perspective, a damper contributes little to the static equilibrium of a system. Removing it may produce only a minimal change in the equilibrium position. Yet it can dramatically alter the system's dynamic response, including its oscillatory behavior, overshoot, settling characteristics, and overall stability. Similarly, removing PP from the TSI model has only a modest effect on the average TSI value but substantially changes the model's longitudinal behavior and event-related signature. This is part 1.